Okay, I think we should be live right now. So um, welcome everybody to the Pipeline Guild conference on carbon reduction in the pipeline industry. This afternoon we've got a packed agenda with interesting speakers from across the industry. And looking at various initiatives that are taking place at the moment to reduce the carbon impact on the planet. So I'd just initially like to welcome, we have speakers from the gas industry. We have James Harrison from Cadent. We have speakers from JCB, Paul Williams and David Banks. We have Matt Pluke from Anglian Water, Lara Young from Costain, and Alex Gray from Thames Water, all putting a different take on the actions that are taking place. So all in all, it's quite an interesting afternoon, hopefully for everybody. So next slide, please. Right. So just before I start, just on the similar, we had a similar event 2 years ago now about leakage reduction, held at JCB's conference centre in New Dockster. And during that event, we did have the concept of personal pledges. So hopefully we'll do the same here, except because it's a virtual event, we can't actually have a whiteboard or flip charts and things and post-it notes. So I would ask people to put their personal pledges as they think of them and want to publish them, just put them in the Q&A box, and then we've got a record of it, of what's going on, and it also inspire other people to do the same. So after each presentation, we will have the question and answers for that presentation after each one. We won't do it all at the end. But the personal pledges, they can carry on throughout the conference. Okay, so why are we doing this? You know, why along with most of industry and most inhabitants of the planet, I think the message has got through that we cannot carry on like we are. As is well publicised every day, really, the relentless increase in global CO2 emissions from human activities is affecting climate change. I was just reading this morning, 2 degrees temperature rises, that sort of thing, and this will irreversibly worsen the environment that we take for granted. So what are we doing in our pipeline industry to reduce carbon emissions? Okay. Next slide, please. So this sort of graph is quite familiar, and this just looks at the scale of the problem. So just in my lifetime, when it started in the 50s, global CO2 emissions were still relatively near the bottom of that graph. They hadn't really gone up in centuries. But I think something happened in the late 50s, 60s, and the level of CO2 emissions just went up exponentially. And you can see there's several graphs, and there's lots of them, and one of the other ones from the paper shows the same thing, that it's just going up out of control. And if we carry on like this, we're going to lose control of events that happen. So really something's got to be done to bring that back to a more manageable level. So next slide, please. So the overriding objective of this conference is to stimulate lasting change and behaviour for everybody in the pipeline industry to think and act differently about the effect their projects have on the environment and climate change, and to influence others to do the same. So to influence yourselves and then influence everybody else. Because in addition to the national government and national infrastructure initiatives, it is really effective if everybody thinks differently about what they're doing, and can they do it better? Can they do it with more of a carbon agenda than with a lowest cost agenda. Okay, next slide. So it's becoming obvious that it's just not acceptable anymore to consider lowest COPEX, regardless of anything else. We must consider whole life carbon costs. And that includes from inception to construction, design, construction, operation, decommissioning, and eventual reuse of the material or the asset. And I think that considering reuse is now part of the equation when looking at whole life, because as far as the planet's concerned, it's every activity that counts, not just certain activities. So we're going to look at today about different ways of carbon efficient fuels, electric fuels, hydrogen fuels, and a whole host of other things where we can just be more efficient and reduce our consumption and reduce our carbon output. Okay. Next slide, please. So during this conference, everyone's encouraged to think about what they do and commit to personal pledges, as I said, in the comments dialogue in the Q&A section. And that's everybody from clients or current owners of an asset, how they procure work, how they procure projects, how they set the targets. For example, UK Water has a commitment to net zero carbon by 2030. So there are lots of initiatives, and most companies have their own personal pledges to reduce carbon outputs to zero by a certain date. So current owners, in the way you do that, the way you procure the work, the way you set programs, the way you assign risk, how all that affects carbon emissions. The designers, they've got a very big role to play in terms of specification. Can things be designed more efficiently? Can we make more use of existing assets, etc.? Contractors, they have a bigger part to play with construction and managing the supply chain in the most efficient way, and the supply chain themselves. And I think that's one of the fastest sort of areas of innovation is in the supply chain. So great opportunities there. And also with that, as I said, to think about the next owner, what we can do with that. So I think coming up, so I think that's next slide. And so now we have presentations from, say, water, gas and construction industries on what is being done to achieve net zero target. And if I could say thank you to our sponsors, Fastflow and Cadent, who make these events possible for everyone to enjoy.